We're going to be talking about today calling out, canceling, and consequences. And this is also the topic of the podcast this week. It was my post on Monday was, I know it sucks, but did you learn anything? And this stemmed from a couple of things. So several months ago, I talked about having listened to a show on NPR. I think it was 1A Fresh Air, one of them. And they were interviewing Loretta Ross, who's a professor, and she was talking about her book that's coming out titled Calling in the Call-Out Culture. And her main point, her fundamental point was, if what we're doing is calling out people just for the purpose of shame or pain, then we're not really doing anything to change behavior. And the whole issue is the whole point should be to change behavior so that people don't do that same thing over and over and over again. So I heard that, and that was several months ago. And then we had snowpocalypse, and one of our senators who decided to take a trip during that time. And then we've had a number of things, a number of people who have exhibited some really, really poor behavior, including the insurrectionists. And then I read on LinkedIn, a woman posted on LinkedIn talking about, hey, I understand this whole call-out culture thing, but I'd really like to propose that we really call it a consequence culture. And I got to thinking about that because I've often said we are free to make choices. We all have a choice. We all have a choice all the time. We have a choice in what we do and how we respond and all of that kind of stuff. We all have choices. And we are free to make those choices. We are not free from the consequences of the choices we make, good and bad, right? So whatever we decide to do, there's always something that's going to happen from that, and then we have to deal with the fallout. So as I was reading this person's post, I thought, yeah, and I commented on it, which is unusual for me. I need to do more of that, actually. And I thought, that is so in line with my belief as well, is that the learning is in the consequences. So even when you look at our particular senator that now everybody is screaming for his resignation, our governor, everybody's screaming for his resignation, ERCOT screaming for all these people that we just are all up in arms, resign, 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 you don't get it, resign, resign, resign. Don't get me wrong, there is behavior that is so egregious that people do need to be canceled. They absolutely need to be canceled. However, when we immediately move to cancellation, we miss the connection of the behavior to consequences. And that's where the learning happens. So if you think about someone who has been elected to office, so the people said, we want you in office. And then we say, resign, resign, resign. This is just so bad, resign, resign, resign. And the person decides to resign. They are then in a position to control the narrative. I resign because people put so much pressure on me. I resign because, and we're hearing this now, especially politically, with that person Green, who's in Congress, how she got there. Well, we do know how she got there, but she's there. We're hearing this now, this rhetoric around, if you simply have a difference of opinion, you get canceled or you get asked to resign. It is not about a difference of opinion, y'all. Let's tell the truth. Let's tell the truth. It is not about a difference of opinion. It is about lying. It is about facts. It is about truth. And so when we immediately tell people, just resign, just boot them out, we are not connecting their behavior to the consequence. So especially in an elected office, my perspective is vote them out. Don't force them to resign, vote them out. That has much more impact than just having somebody resign. Look what happened in Georgia. The two senators who lost their Senate races behind their behavior, behind their rhetoric. People got out and voted and said, we do not want this. We do not tolerate this. This is not behavior that we want, right? And so that the impact of actually losing those races because of that behavior and because of people's rejection of that behavior had so much more impact than just telling people to resign. So when we start thinking about calling out and canceling and consequences, we can't be so mad and so upset, as my grandma used to say, so butthurt, that we forget that the important thing is to change behavior. Because if you don't connect the behavior to the consequence, then people keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, and you never have change. And the idea is to have some kind of change in the process. That's what's important, having some kind of change. So before we automatically just start canceling everybody, taking contracts and having people lose jobs and all that kind of stuff. And again, there are people who absolutely, that is the consequence that needs to be suffered. But that is not the case with everyone. We are spreading peanut butter, right? We have swung the pendulum all the way to the side, and we forget that there are degrees. There are degrees. There are very few things that are all or nothing. Now, there are such things as facts, and there is such thing as truth. And as I think it was a journalist said, you are entitled to your own opinion, but you are not entitled to your own facts, right? So there are facts that exist. There is truth that exists. And so if people decide that they want to have a difference of opinion, that's fine. If people decide they want to express that difference of opinion, that's fine. But we are responsible and accountable for how and when and where we express those opinions. And you can't couch everything under free speech. Because you also can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater, right? That is illegal. You cannot do that. Because of the danger associated with someone doing that, that is not something that is protected speech. That is not free speech. So everything you say is not protected. Everything you say is not covered under freedom of speech. And sometimes what you say is just wrong, and sometimes what you say is just ugly. And if that's the case, then if you are bold enough to say it, then you need to be strong enough to take the consequences. And mature and adult enough to understand a different perspective and hopefully change behavior, or just double down. If you choose to double down, then you got to suffer those consequences as well, right? But when we look at calling out versus canceling versus consequences, the key is connecting the behavior to the consequences, because that's where learning is. Kids don't learn because you keep telling them not to touch the hot stove. They learn because they touched it when you told them not to and they got burned. The experience supported the rhetoric that they were told, right? The experience told them, oh, yep, they were right. But until they actually experienced it, it was just words. And that does happen a lot, right? We are beings that learn through experience, right? We are beings that take what we have felt, what we've experienced, what we've heard, what we've seen, and we turn that into what our truth is. And sometimes that truth is actually accurate and sometimes it's not, but it's still what we believe to be our truth. And until we experience something different that's contrary and are able to make that connection of what we think we know to what we have experienced based on the behavior that we exhibited based on what we think we know, we are unable to change our behavior or our perspective or our thinking or understand our truth might be not the truth. But if we immediately just get canceled, then it's easier for us to just double down or sit back or say, well, they just didn't like what I said, or they just didn't agree with me. And because they didn't agree with me, they just decided not to listen. And don't get me wrong, that stuff does happen. It absolutely happens, especially in business. That happens. Those cultures where if you disagree with the powers that be, you get quote unquote canceled, right? Not put on the project, taken off a project, not given a bonus, reprimanded, all those kind of things because you have said something that's contrary to what the powers that be believe. And that's not discussing whether or not it's true and all that kind of stuff and how you said it, but just in general. There are cultures that punish dissension. And what is learned from that is that if I dissent, the consequences I am punished. And so we connect the consequences to the behavior. And that's how you get cultures where people just don't say anything, where they get quiet, where they just agree even when they know it's wrong. Because the behavior that they have experienced, right, the consequences that they have experienced begin to form their behavior going forward. So when you're sitting in a situation where you've got yes people all around you, pause and look back and say, why is that? What have I as a leader potentially done that says people just need to agree with me all the time? How have I come at people when they disagree? Am I nasty about it? Am I quick to get angry? Am I not accommodating for differences of opinion? Because people can only take that for so long. And even the person that's the strongest, who just is adamant that no matter what, the truth is going to be told, and they're going to bring everything out, and they're going to make sure everything's on the table. Even the person that has the strongest intestinal fortitude to do that gets tired. They eventually get tired, and they're not going to continue to try to push forward the truthful narrative if every time they do so, the consequence is to be marginalized or to be pushed aside or to somehow be punished. They're just not going to do it, right? And that goes for your personal relationships too. If every time you try to speak the truth, or you try to ask questions, or you try to engage, you get backlash, or you get punished, or you get the silent treatment or whatever, you're going to just stop doing it. You're going to just go to ground. That's what they say in relationships. You know, they talk a lot about women in relationships, and they say, you know, when a woman gets quiet, that's when you know she's in trouble. You're in trouble. When she stops arguing, when she stops pushing, when she stops trying to get you to understand, when she stops trying to engage, she's done. She's done. Because she's tried to engage, she's tried to be involved, but now she's tired. And that done may mean done. That done may mean done with you. That done may mean done with that situation. But you have now taught this person in your relationship how you're going to respond to something, and they have decided what that means for them. And that may or may not be good for you. I'm just saying. Right? So that whole idea of canceling and calling out and consequences is really important. Now let's talk a little bit more about kind of the call out piece, because that really got big with the Me Too movement. Really big. And I do believe that there needed to be a correction, right? We all, as time moves on, there's always a course correction. And there needed to be a course correction around these environments that supported and covered up harassment of all types, right? That covered up discrimination, that covered up just really, really bad behavior. There needed to be a righting of the ship. There needed to be an ability to start calling that out and making that public, so that those who were victims could somehow manage through the victimization, right? But here's what happens with that too, on a multitude of levels, right? I mean, we could talk about this for 4 years. On the one hand, because it is just kind of getting into the forefront, it's been happening for generations, but we're just kind of coming into being really, really public about calling out this bad behavior. We have, again, swung the pendulum. So our feelings get hurt, we call somebody out. We misunderstand, we call somebody out. Or in the rare occasion you have someone who is just upset with somebody, they call them out. Careers are ruined, reputations are ruined behind a lie. And it only takes one woman, and I'm going to use woman because I was talking about the Me Too movement. It only takes one woman to have lied about a situation to negate every other woman's situation. See, you can't trust them, right? The same isn't true in the opposite direction, by the way. It only takes one person of color who was hired into a position just because they were a person of color, not because they actually had the skills to do so. It only takes one of those people to not perform well for the company to say, well, see, we tried. We tried, it didn't work. Only takes one. But nobody's looking at the initial decision about that, right? So we do need to still be able to call out the things that are wrong, the things that are disconnected, the things that are driving behavior and consequences that are unintended and undesirable. And we need to understand how and when to call those out. Everything doesn't need to be put on social media. Everything doesn't need to be in the news. Everything doesn't need to be public. Sometimes, as my dad used to say, you praise in public, you criticize in private. Sometimes those things need to be done behind closed doors, for lack of a better phrase. Because what you're trying to do If what you're trying to do is change behavior, it's not about public humiliation. It's not about public humiliation. Now, if you've done everything possible and you still can't get somebody's attention, then maybe that going public with something is the only way to get somebody's attention and to say you're serious.
But it would be hard to avoid public humiliation if you are public, and because of social media now, like we never would have known Ted Cruz went to Cancun, if it wasn't for social media.
Yes, it is a very slippery slope, right? That's the thing. You got to assume everybody's got a camera. You got to assume everybody's got a microphone. You got to assume, especially if you're a public figure, that everybody is seeing you. Everybody. And none of us is perfect. None of us is perfect. Somebody's going to catch you doing something that you shouldn't be doing. Because we're human. We are fallible. We make mistakes. And does everyone need to be completely canceled for the mistakes that they make? For slips in judgment? And does that cancellation have to be an immediate elimination of somebody's livelihood? I don't know. Again, sometimes things are so egregious, like the insurrectionists, they need to lose everything. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, right, if there is not, bones sticking out and blood on the floor, does somebody need to be canceled? Or does the behavior need to be called out in such a way that the person can then fix the behavior? Because truly, the idea is we are trying to fix behavior that is unacceptable. Theoretically, at least, that's what we're trying to do. We just don't want the behavior to continue. And so if that's what we're trying to do, then why are we just immediately canceling people?
We have a question.
Yes.
From Issa Jackson says, what are some levels of consequences that could or should be implemented for leaders in government in between election times for their positions other than the presidential election?
So that's a really good question. And by the way, I'm going to answer your question, but by the way, I need everybody to stay paying attention. Don't go to sleep. Because there are laws trying to be passed right now to increase voter suppression because people showed out. We showed up and we showed out and we voted. And so there are people who are afraid of that, and they're trying to find a way to keep people from voting. So pay attention. Wherever you are, pay attention. Okay. So how should leaders be held accountable? I think there are multiple ways leaders can be held accountable. One, we have to pay attention and we have to ask the hard questions. So for example, in Texas, we have got so many people pointing fingers, right? Mm-hmm. It was ERCOT, it was the Public Utility Commission, it was the governor, and all of them are pointing at the other people. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, the way you hold people accountable is you have an independent investigation that actually goes through and says, here is what happened. It's a root cause analysis. What happened? Now, we all know fundamentally what happened. What fundamentally happened is that we deregulated in Texas. We are no longer on the federal grid, and somebody decided that it was less important to do maintenance than it was to make profit. That's what we know, fundamentally. But when we're talking about holding people accountable, we need to hold people accountable based on facts that can be proven and can be demonstrated, right? It's not a court of law, because I had somebody tell me a long time ago, the thing about the court of law is it's not necessarily about the truth, it's about who has the best story. And that just broke my heart, right? But they were right. But in the court of public opinion, what we want to make sure we do is we want to get facts. We want to get facts, and then we want to hold them accountable. We need to call. We need to sign letters. We need to go to town meetings. We don't need to just sit silent. We need to say, this is unacceptable for us, and we expect something different. And then we need to use the power of our voice to do that. Because we have a tendency to get complacent. I mean, I'm even feeling it myself now. Here in Texas, it was snowmageddon for a week. Now the sun is out, and it's like, oof. But it's not over.
It's not.
It's not over. We are so quick, especially when we've been in pain. When the pain goes away, we are so quick to just sit in the fact that the pain is over and just try to move on. Because we are resilient. But it's that whole idea of, I'm going to forgive, but I'm not going to forget. We have to, when you're talking about leaders, people we have put in a place of making decisions for us, not to us, for us, we have to do our research. We have to pay attention to the facts. We have to ask hard questions. We have to pay attention to the answers. And then we have to utilize our power as people with a voice to hold them accountable. Some of that is canceling them, right? Some of that would be, you must resign. You must resign, and having a really, really powerful big voice that the people must resign. Some of that is we need to censure people. Some of that is we wait and we vote them out if we think they're not going to make too much damage between now and then. Because again, it's how can we execute a level of consequence that demonstrates that it is tied to the behavior so the behavior doesn't happen again. That's my biggest problem with the whole impeachment thing. That we did not impeach this person for a second time. It wasn't the impeachment itself. It was the message that you can act this way and there be no consequences. Not so much for this person, because we already know what the issues are with this person, but for everyone else that is thinking that they need to act the same way. And we're seeing it. It just bolsters the same bad behavior. So if we want to stop the behavior, we have to hold people accountable. We have to say, we are not okay with these crazy bills. We are not okay with the fact that our entire state ended up without power. Now they're saying they had to do what they had to do, or we would have had, a complete state blackout. I don't know that to be true. I have no idea, right? I know I'm doing my research. And we know that there's this big network, right? So it is messy. There's ERCOT, there's all of the distributors, right? Mm-hmm. There's those folks who own the grid because we privatized it, guys. We deregulated it. And so every little cog along the wheel made a decision. And that decision impacts the decision down the line. So if we change the rules where we did not force people to do a certain level of maintenance, and then audit around that maintenance, we essentially told people, yeah, it's not that important. That's what we did. That's just the truth. And that truth has consequences. So it is important to answer your question in a shorter fashion. One, do your research and find out what the real cause was, because we need to go after the root cause. Two, use your voice. Call, write, petition, show up to town halls, show up to live meetings, ask your questions, call your news stations, exercise your voice to say, we still don't have answers and we want answers. And not only do we want answers to what happened, we want answers as to what's going to happen next time so that we prevent this in the future. How are you holding people accountable for not exercising the same behavior so we don't have the same outcome? Because insanity is, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. If we don't change behavior, it will happen again. If we don't change behavior, it will happen again. Them's just the facts.
There was an episode on Good Times one time when Valona worked at this department store. Mm-hmm. And she was in the dressing room and she was a watcher. Mm-hmm. And they came in and they said, well, who's watching the watchers? And when you talk about holding people accountable, Greg Abbott said he's going to have an investigation. Mm-hmm. But who is over him?
Who's watching the watchers? Yep. You notice I said we need an independent investigation, right? We need independent people who are not tied politically to do an investigation, who also don't have a dog in the hunt, as they say, that their only desire is to get to the truth of what happened. It's hard to find those people in our political environment that we have right now, but they can be found. It's not impossible. It's hard, but it's not impossible. But we need to find people who are not first seeking to have some kind of political appointment to be part of this. I think I was listening to some of Merrick Garland's answers in his Senate confirmation hearings, and he talked about the independence, going back to having an independent Justice Department, a Justice Department that is not guided by the executive office, and it's supposed to be independent. It's supposed to be independent, and so it's the same thing here. We need an independent investigation. Should it be supported by the governor? Absolutely, it should be, because if the governor is holding himself accountable and the governor is being a real leader who holds himself accountable and responsible, because he is the leader of the state, which means whatever happens in the state is his responsibility. Yeah. Period. The end. Full stop. Whatever happens in this state is his responsibility. He took the office. It's his responsibility. right? He can't abdicate that. He can delegate some of it, but he can't abdicate responsibility. So therefore, he should be pushing for an investigation. He should also ensure that the investigation is trustworthy and independent. And there is where the rubber's going to meet the road.
Is there any accountability that he can be held for going on to another news source and blaming the outage on something that hasn't even occurred, the Green New Deal?
You know, so that's politics, right? That's politics. And that's where I say we got to do your own research, and you got to pay attention. Because enough people did pay attention to that he had to backtrack.
Mm-hmm.
Because the reality is 10%, maybe even less than that, 10% of our energy grid in Texas is wind or solar. Yeah. 10%. 10%.
Well, you said it.
That was not the reason our grid went down, folks. And it's not the whole idea, well, all the windmills froze. They have wind energy in Iceland. Their windmills don't freeze. Now, because I believe in being fair and being balanced, is it possible, and I used to work for a company that actually made the blades, the polyurethane blades for these big windmills. Is it possible that the material that we used, or the way that we covered the windmill, the material that was used, the polyurethanes and things that were used in the windmills here in Texas, were not built to withstand extreme cold? That is a possibility. That is a distinct possibility. Is it also a possibility that somebody should have thought of that? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. That's called strategy. That's called having enough people in the room that think forward and not just backward. That's about understanding that climate change is real and believing the science and not just going for profit and not just going for speed. So I don't know that there are any other consequences. What's interesting about that situation where he went on the news is that is actually an example of the consequences being connected to the behavior, because people called him out on it. People called him out. News outlets called him out. People got on social media and called him out. Because you're right, the new Green Deal hadn't even happened.
Yeah.
And again, 10% is wind. And here's the other issue. Again, people, if you don't listen actively, not just with what the words or people saying, you need to listen to what they don't say, and you need to do your own research and really understand what's going on. Here's the other thing about that. When you look at just energy in general, and you even look at what happened in the election, because Texas almost went blue, but Biden said, fossil fuels, and people lost their minds. He's going to stop oil. Here's the reality, people. The entire world is using products and processes that are based on fossil fuels. Period. The end. It is completely pervasive in all of our infrastructure. It is not going away tomorrow. It's not going away in 10 years, y'all. It's just not. It is just not. Okay? It's not going away. So stop panicking. And we have to find a way to use renewables. We just have to. Because it is also not unending. Fossil fuels are not unending, right? So I told people when they were all up in arms, I said, but y'all aren't paying attention. If you look at the Exxon Mobils, the BPs, the Shells, the Halliburtons, all these folks, they are not calling themselves big oil and gas. They're not calling themselves chemicals. They're calling themselves energy companies. There's a reason they started calling themselves energy companies. And the day after the election, Shell started running commercials calling themselves an energy company and talking about renewables. Talking about how we've been listening to our customers and we are focused on renewable energy. Because here's the thing. If you are strategic and you are forward thinking and you are innovative, you have to do something. You're going to go the way of Polaroid and Kodak, Motorola, BlackBerry. If you are not paying attention to where things are going, you're going to be left behind. And that's why they're energy companies and not oil and gas companies.
It's so true.
So don't be fooled by the rhetoric that you hear. Listen to it because it informs you, right? But dig deeper. Don't just believe everything you hear. Don't believe everything you read. Go to multiple sources. Look at multiple things. Do your own research. Go to the library. Right? Read a newspaper. Read multiple newspapers. Because you can get them online. But don't just believe it because somebody said it. And because they were in a certain office, so they must be telling the truth. Right? Go do your own research. Pay attention to what's going on. And then make a decision. But that idea with Abbott, that was a perfect example of somebody executing a behavior and then feeling the consequences and having to change behavior based on the consequences, at least in the moment. We'll see how long the behavior stage changed, right? Because in the moment, he felt the pain of the consequences of his action. Mm-hmm. And I'm telling you, I love my state. I'm a native Texan. I love my state, and we crazy. We got issues. We have got some issues in Texas, and I am a Texan to my soul. And Texans are hot. Hot. You hear me? Across the spectrum are livid that we had so many people without power, without water. Are you kidding me? Without water and still unable to get clean water and food in Texas in 2021. Because someone or someone's didn't have enough integrity to run things in a way that was focused on people first and profit second. People are pissed, y'all.
Dr. Cynthia J. Hickman said the frustration is the time it takes to change these narratives.
Yes. And that's why I said in the very beginning, when you talk about calling out and canceling, right, and consequences, when we cancel people too quickly, they get to control the narrative. They get to control the narrative. Think about, and this is always controversial, I want you to think about the pro-life, pro-choice movement. Who's controlling the narrative is pro-life. They have turned pro-choice, the pro-life movement has run the narrative such that pro-choice equals pro-abortion. Pro-life changed that narrative. And it's been very difficult for folks on the pro-choice side to say, no, this is about choice and access. Because the narrative got just taken over and people ran with it. Right? It is the same thing we see politically. He who controls the narrative controls the outcome, y'all. That's why we had insurrectionists. He who controls the narrative controls the outcome. If you look at what's happening now in the Republican Party, at least new politicians, they are spending more and more time on TV, on radio, on podcasts, not making legislation, creating narrative, getting out in front, creating the story, creating what's real and what's truth. That's what they're spending time, and they got that from the predecessor. Because he who gets out first controls the narrative, especially when you talk about a population that is so busy they're not paying attention and has gotten to be, right, wrong, or indifferent, we have gotten to be really intellectually lazy. We would just as soon have somebody tell us what to do and tell us what the information is and not do our own research because it's just easier to just believe that. It takes less effort. But if we are going to really change behavior, we have got to pay more attention than that. And we have got to be willing to challenge the narrative with facts and with truth. Just like Texans challenged Governor Abbott around wind being the reason that the grid went down. And forced him to backtrack on that. That was because the people were paying attention. Mm-hmm. And the people were paying attention. In Texas, y'all, I want you to hear that. In Texas, people were paying attention. Texas, which is still red, people were paying attention, calling out the governor, saying, that is just not true. So it is possible. It is possible to speak truth. It is possible to connect consequences to behavior and to change behavior, at least in the moment. Whether or not it sticks remains to be seen.
But if you notice, he only did that on Fox Network. He did not do that
he did not.
on the local news.
He did not. Again, that's the narrative, right? He went to a place and he was playing to the audience. He was playing to that audience. Because for him, politically, and this is just my guess because he's a politician, politically, it was good for him to take the opportunity to go after the Green New Deal. Because he's living in Texas, we're oil and gas country, right? And so if I go after the Green New Deal, then I'm showing my support for the industry that supports Texas. What he didn't do is think that all the way through. He didn't think that all the way through because, see, that just wasn't the truth.
And it goes back to your point about getting from multiple sources, because I actually saw that on Fox News.
Yes.
Because I watch Fox News just to see what's going on and what they're saying, as opposed to everyone else.
Right.
So that is good to stay informed. Now that we know, when we talk about the call-out culture,
right,
was what Ted Cruz did merit to be fired or resign?
I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to answer that. So let me take it in pieces. What he did in terms of going on a trip when people were suffering was bad judgment. That was bad judgment. The fact that he then blamed his kids was crazy. That was just crazy. Did that behavior in and of itself, taken in isolation, warrant canceling the senator? I don't think so. I would argue not. Because there are things that are much more egregious that this person has done, and he's still there. But if you take behavior in totality, does he really deserve to still have this office? Does he really deserve to be representing the people that he, in that moment, abandoned and lied about? Because now the evidence is coming forward to say it wasn't just the daughters asking if they wanted to go. That wasn't true. That wasn't true, right? Speak the truth, shame the devil, right? That just wasn't true. And again, you got to pay attention. You've got to pay attention because everybody's got a phone, everybody's got a camera, everybody's paying attention, and everybody is not your friend. Everybody is not your friend, and people are hot. People are without power. People are without water. And when that's the case, when people are in survival mode, they're going to do what they need to do to survive, including calling you out and putting you on blast when you are impeding their ability to survive. And I think that's what happened with this particular senator, whose name I have a hard time saying. So that one incident, does that mean he should be canceled? I don't think so in isolation. But I think the looking at his service in totality warrants a review and warrants a decision as to whether or not he deserves to continue to represent the state. And only the people can decide that. But I need the people to pay attention. I need the people to really be listening and trying to get at truth and trying to get at fact. And I need people to be paying attention to all of these laws that people are trying to put on the books to continue to suppress the vote.
Let me ask this. Does maybe because of what he did before this merit people saying he need to resign? Do you think we would have not cared? Like, I would have went to Cancun too, it was cold. If he wasn't already trying to overthrow the election and other things he were doing, because even Republican people don't like him.
I think he has exhibited some behavior in the last several months that have put a target on him. But he has also, people will reveal themselves to you early, believe them the first time. This is not new behavior from this particular person. It's just been much more blatant in public because he felt like it was okay to do so. So if you look at the behavior in totality, I think there is a question as to whether or not he deserves, because it is an honor to serve. It is not a right to serve. No one has a right to be a political representative of anybody. Nobody has a right. They earn the honor of serving. And then they get there, many of them, and forget that they are supposed to be there to serve the people, all of the people, right? So I think if you take his behavior in total, there are some things about his character, in my perspective, that are questionable. That are questionable. And what's important about this, for those of you who are listening, is not so much about this person, but it's about looking at this behavior and looking what happened and taking that in context of how are you showing up? How are you behaving? What is the message that you're sending from your behavior and from your words? Are you operating in integrity and authenticity? And are you willing to be accountable and responsible for what you do? I know for me, when I was leading a bunch of people, I was the first one to say, ooh, okay, I messed that up. I take responsibility. I'm going to fix it. Right? You didn't ever have to call me out because most of the time I knew I'd messed it up before anybody else. And I figured, you know what? Why lie? Because for me, y'all, why tell a lie? Because then I got to keep up with all the lies. I ain't got that kind of time. I don't have that kind of time. My brain power is just not such. So just tell the truth. Just tell the truth. Own it, right? You cannot abdicate your responsibility. You can delegate, but you can't abdicate. You are responsible for your actions. You are responsible, and you can be held accountable for the outcomes of those, right? So this person and many persons similar to him on both sides, right? And that is true because there are some on both sides who have some really interesting behavior, y'all. So that's not a, I don't say that as one of those, well, you know, because that's not me. Although I am a balanced girl. There is some behavior that we have seen over the last 12 years that warrant some huge question marks. And a lot of research and a lot of evaluation, both of our own individual values and what we expect of people and what we're willing to tolerate. We have gotten intellectually lazy, right? We have gotten to the place where we just say, well, it could be worse. Could it? And if it could, are we willing to say, well, it's the lesser of two evils. It could be worse. Are we okay with that? Are we okay with that? In general, right? There are some times when you don't have any control, but when we have control, are we okay with just going with the lesser of two evils? Or are we willing to fight for what we believe is the right thing to do? The best thing for everyone, not just one. A return to a level of decorum and collaboration. That doesn't mean we all have to agree on everything. Because we're all human. Everybody has a different perspective. Everybody has a different opinion. That doesn't mean you have to all be in lockstep for everything. That's not what that means. What that means is we have a maturity and a respect for fellow humans to at least listen to somebody else's point of view, even if we don't agree, and then to act accordingly. Because as I've said multiple times before, how do you know your truth if you've never heard anyone else's? And especially if you like to fight and win an argument and win a debate, one of the best ways to do that is get really clear on the other side of the argument. Get really clear on what somebody else's position is, because that will help you strengthen yours. Because then you have an answer to everything that they're going to say. So even if you don't do it out of just respect and the idea that you need to understand something, hell, do it because you like to fight. You know, do it because you like to be right. Because you like to have a response to everything. The way to do that is to listen to the other side. And then prepare yourself to respond to their positions. That's how you do that.
Let me ask this, because the question was said, these photo ops are not impressive. And I was on a thread the other day with ABC News, and the people were complaining and saying something. And one lady said, don't worry about it, Ted. No, it was on Ted's thing. Don't worry about it, Ted. Don't worry about these haters. And I said, no, ma'am, it's not hate to hold somebody accountable.
Right.
There are questions and concerns. That doesn't equate hating somebody.
Right. Right.
We can all take a flight to wherever we want to go.
Right.
But he had a responsibility.
Right.
Should he have, because the next day he's out passing out water. The AOC was down here giving money away. I mean,
Right.
got money.
Right.
So he's out passing out water. What would be the best course of action for him to correct this?
You know, so that's really interesting, because the other side of this is forgiveness, right? If we're going to hold people accountable, and our expectation is that behavior is changed, we have to enable people to change their behavior, right? That's what's hard, right? That's the hard work. The hard work is to say, okay, I told you to change. You're trying to change. I got to give you a chance to change, right? And so we can be skeptical, and we can pause, as they say. Trust comes in on a Greyhound, but it leaves on a Maserati. It is hard to regain trust once it is lost. So, was it a good idea for him to be out distributing water? I think that's debatable. Because of timing. I think if he was doing it because I think if he was doing it because he really wanted to help, if that's what was really in his heart, then so be it. I think it's going to be very hard for anyone to believe that that's the case. Because it appears that it was simply, oops, I got caught, I better look like I care.
Right.
And so trust in this person has been broken. Trust has been broken. For a lot of people, trust has been broken. He's still going to have those people who support, who don't care. He could also be one of those that shoots people in the street and be fine, as our former said. And there are going to be people that are going to support him no matter what. But those people who are holding him accountable, it's going to take a while for him to regain that trust. And there are a lot of people out here for photo ops. It's just like, never let your left hand know what the right hand is doing, right? When you go to the Houston Food Bank, like for my birthday one year, my family was in town and we went to the food bank and volunteered. And this was, I think it was right after Harvey. And it was phenomenal. We had a really good time. Just in general, it was just so uplifting to do that and to make those things, to see how the operation works. It was just incredible. But my family didn't sit in front of there taking photo ops, right? We just didn't. We talked about volunteering at the food bank in the context of, hey, if you're looking for someplace to go volunteer at the food bank. And I did it again with a good friend of mine. But we weren't taking all kinds of pictures and posting them everywhere. Hey, we're at the food bank. Now, there are companies that do that, and there are ways to celebrate it, and there's a fine line, right? Because there is some publicity that comes out of, hey, y'all, I was volunteering today. Let me tell you how fantastic this experience was. I highly recommend you volunteering at this organization. Food Bank, Habitat for Humanity, whatever it is, right? American Heart Association. There is some promotion that these nonprofits really can use by people being very public with their support. And there is a difference in doing that and doing it for a photo op. And people can tell the difference. Mm-hmm. People can tell the difference. And if your behavior up to that point has been very self-serving and lacking in integrity and authenticity, then your photo op is going to be self-serving and lacking integrity and authenticity. And people can see that. People can see it and people can feel it. So you just gotta be honest with yourself. Well, you don't have to. It is in your best interest to be honest with yourself about why you're doing something and what you expect the response to be. Because it's not necessarily going to be what you think all the time. It's just not. Okay, Pete's cracking me up.
Pete got that nice bicycle with that big stereo on it.
Yeah, that's the beautiful thing about KCOH, the radio station with these big windows. We get to see what's going on. And we got lovely, amazing Pete riding around on this bicycle with this big old boombox on the back. And we can hear it through the windows. He is. Old school R&B. So anyway, I think it's really important, you guys, for us to take a pause, because everybody has been so jacked up with everything that's going on. 2020 was just nuts. 2021, which we expected to be much better, has turned out to be nuts so far. We're surviving. We are resilient people. But it's important for us to pause. It's important for us to not contribute to the crazy, right? And canceling everything immediately is not necessarily contributing. I'm thinking about that country singer who lost his contracts and all that kind of stuff because he was caught saying a racial slur to his boys, right? Because again, remember, everybody's got a camera and everybody's got a microphone. And I didn't know who this person was. I had no idea who he was. And the businesses have a right to cancel. And quite frankly, with some of the history of country music, although they're trying to do some things, there may be a different and stronger message that country music needs to send in order to be inclusive. So there's probably some thoughtfulness behind that in terms of having such a drastic response to him. But I tell you what, his fans have not let him suffer. His stuff is still selling. It's selling gangbusters, right? Just because his contract was canceled. So just pay attention. And I have to remind people, when all this stuff was happening, oh my God, they canceled him. Oh my God. Do y'all remember the Dixie Chicks?
Yep.
When they said something about George Bush that wasn't even nearly as close as what some of these other people are saying. I mean, immediate backlash on the Dixie Chicks. Now they've come back and they're doing some amazing things. I love me some Dixie Chicks, by the way. They are doing some amazing things, but they were canceled. Nobody talks about that because that was before the cancel culture, right? But they were canceled because they said something. So just really, as you continue to go through this year and you continue to go through this week, and especially everybody in Texas and Louisiana where we were really impacted by snowpocalypse 2021, let's think very seriously about this calling out versus canceling. What do we really expect to happen, and how are we going to hold people accountable? Those people who are responsible, whether or not they want to own their responsibility, those people who are responsible, how are we going to hold them accountable? And more importantly, how are we going to ensure that this doesn't happen again? Now, something else may happen, but this mistake shouldn't happen again. And how do we hold them accountable for preparing? And how do we, in this very capitalistic society, try to help organizations understand how to put people over profits? Because here's the thing. If you are doing the right thing by people, your profits are going to be just fine.
Exactly.
And probably better than you ever imagined. Because people who are taken care of and who are respected and who feel like they are valued are going to work harder and longer and better than those who are put upon. So if you put people over profits, your profits will take care of themselves.
Should we have a minimum wage increase?
You know, I have mixed as an HR person. I have mixed feelings about minimum wage, but here's why my feelings are mixed. So on the one hand, I believe everybody needs to have a living wage. I have no qualms about that. Here's where I have a challenge with $15. It's an institutional challenge. And here's what I mean by that. If you look at the way compensation is set, compensation is based on the value of a job, right? How complex it is, right? It is based on the impact that it makes, all of those kind of things, right? And just because a job is critical, criticality and complexity are different. So where I have a challenge is if that minimum wage job that requires minimum skill is increased 100%, then how much am I going to have to increase those that require specific skills, specific expertise, specific education? Because the scale is a moving scale. So from a monetary perspective, I understand, and this is where, I tend to be fairly moderate from a financial perspective. I understand where businesses are concerned, because if that bottom goes up, everything else has to go up as well. And that's a challenge. Now, I also think you can fund some of that. If we're just real, you can fund a lot of that by the CEOs who are making crazy money.
Exactly.
From their salary, make more and more of their wages that variable compensation. Give them more stock, right? Give them more of those things that have to do with the performance of the company. Take their base down and redistribute that, which would help tremendously for your ability to still do an increase on the minimum and be able to bump everybody else up. So for me, it's about the math.
Okay, now they're saying that it doesn't start exactly at 15. It starts at 9, and then in 2024 it goes
right.
Up.
They're doing a sliding scale.
No?
So again, for me, it's not an absolute no. For me, it is, if you're going to do that, somebody's got to do the strategic thinking and the planning to do it in a way that you're automatically not causing businesses to actually lay off. And let me be really clear about this. Those businesses who truly financially are unable to support it, not those businesses who have said, well, we just don't want to, so now we're going to say, well, we couldn't afford it, because that's a lie. Just like trickle-down economics doesn't work. When companies don't have to pay as many taxes, when companies get breaks, they give dividends. They do not necessarily reinvest in innovation or job creation. We know that. Those are the facts. Go research it. Those are the facts. So I would want to see, how are we going to support businesses that truly, from a financial perspective, are going to struggle lifting the bottom and still supporting the top? Because most of those businesses would like to do that because they want people to have a living wage too, because then people come to work and they're not as stressed, right? So people want to do the right thing. How do they do it economically?
So do we agree that there should be something though? Because maybe they can
Yeah.
meet in the middle.
I think there should be something because right now, $7.50 isn't a living wage.
Right.
The reality is what we've got now at minimum wage is not a living wage. It's just not. It's not a living wage. Can we do something like for those who are, bartenders, servers, those kind of things? Can we go to a minimum wage instead of a tip type of compensation? Because those folks are making $2 an hour plus tips.
Where's equality in living wage?
Where's equality in living wage? Yeah, I know. This is the whole thing about living wages is a big complex issue. Because it's not, and a living wage in Texas is very different than a living wage in San Francisco.
Yeah, that's true.
Because that's the other issue. That's the thing I think we forget sometimes. In this country, there are some absolutely amazing things about this country. And we have some very, very big issues that are extremely complex. And I think we expect people to fix them tomorrow. But they didn't get this way in a day. They didn't get this way in 10 years. They got this way over generations. And we are living with the unexpected and unintended consequences of decisions that were made generations ago. For example, we have a really hard time finding plumbers and welders and kind of those quote unquote blue collar and manufacturing jobs. Why? Because generationally, after the Industrial Revolution, parents were saying they wanted their kids to do better. They didn't want them working in mines. They didn't want them working in manufacturing. They didn't see that as good a work. So you have whole generations of people that were really focused on white collar, on office jobs, because that was seen as doing better. But that means it's hard to find the talent to do the other stuff that still needs to be done. That's an unintended consequence. And I say unintended because nobody expected it to be detrimental. People really do have a heart for wanting their kids to do better than they did. They just didn't know that was going to have this impact, right? And so it's the same thing with the wages. Nobody really understood how that was going to happen over time. So it's just a matter of having the intestinal fortitude to attack and address these really big issues. And having people who have the maturity to focus on the issue and not the personal, political position. Let's focus on the issue because, a high tide rises all boats, y'all. If you have more people that have a living wage, that means you have more money that's going into the system.
It really is.
You have more people who are spending. You have more people who are then supporting small businesses that are the backbone of this country.
And it says in New York has $15 an hour.
Yes. Yeah, New York does have $15 an hour, and it is expensive to live in New York. So the question becomes, is that really a living wage in New York? It's $15 an hour, but is it a living wage in New York? I don't know. I guess it depends on where you live in New York.
That's true. Yeah. Well, I thought the number next week is 713-319-8347. Again, 713-319-8347. We want you to call in on next week's show for Laurel's 1 year anniversary.
1 year anniversary. And it's my dad, would have been his 81st birthday. Woo. So please join in next week. Call in, ask questions, continue to do them online too, because we're going to be taking all kinds of questions. I'll try to decide if I'll have a topic ready, but I'd really just like to engage with all of you on my 1 year anniversary. So please call in, tell your friends. Thank you for watching. Yep, we're over again. Thank you so much for watching and for tuning in. I appreciate you more than I can say. I will plan to see all of you next week. 713-319-8347. Jerry and I both will be posting this too on our pages too, so you'll have it. Thanks, y'all. See you next week.